War Thunder has never looked stronger. More than a decade after its release, it's still receiving massive updates. Every few months, we get another top tier jet, another modern tank, another premium vehicle, and another reason for players to jump back into the battle, or some may think. And honestly, that's impressive. Very few online games survive for this long, let alone continue growing year after year, releasing more content. If you only looked at the numbers, you'd probably think everything is fine. The player count is healthy, updates are still arriving, major content drops happen several times a year, and there are more vehicles in War Thunder today than ever before. So why would anyone say the game is headed for disaster? This is War Thunder is headed for disaster. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Here's the thing, I don't actually think War Thunder is dying. Not today. If anything, the numbers suggest it's doing incredibly well. And that's important because this isn't going to be another video where someone points at a Steam chart and says, look, the game is dead. Because it isn't. That'd be an easy argument to make. It just wouldn't be an honest one. But here's where I think people are looking at the wrong numbers. Player count tells us how many people are logging in. It doesn't really tell us why they're logging in. It doesn't tell us how excited they are to keep playing. And it definitely doesn't tell us whether the game is moving in a healthy direction 5 years from now, because history has shown us that successful games don't usually fail overnight. They slowly stop evolving. They slowly lose the trust of their community, and one day people simply stop caring as much as they used to. And that's what made me start asking a different question. Not, is War Thunder dying? Because I don't think that's the right question we should be asking. The question I started to ask myself was this: how can a game that keeps getting bigger still feel like it's standing still at the same time? Because over the last several years, almost every major controversy has looked different on the surface. Sometimes it's the economy, sometimes it's battle ratings, sometimes it's cast, sometimes it's premium vehicles. But the more I looked into it, the more I started noticing a pattern. War Thunder has become incredibly good at giving players more vehicles to unlock, but not nearly as good at giving them new ways to enjoy the vehicles they already have. And I think that single issue is connected to almost every complaint the community has today. So over the next few minutes, I want to look beyond the player counts, beyond the update trailers, and beyond the headlines, because I don't think War Thunder has a content problem. I think it has an innovation problem. And if that's true, then today's success could end up creating tomorrow's biggest challenge. Let's start with the one thing War Thunder has never struggled with: content. So, if War Thunder isn't struggling because of its player count, then what exactly is the problem? To answer that, I think we need to separate two words that often get treated like they mean the exact same thing: content and gameplay. Because they are not the same thing. War Thunder has an unbelievable amount of content. In fact, I'd argue it's one of the most content-rich military games ever created. There are thousands of playable vehicles spanning nearly a century of military history. Every major update introduces new tanks, aircrafts, helicopters, ships, weapons, maps, and mechanics. And Gaijin deserves credit for that. The amount of work that goes into researching and modeling these vehicles is genuinely impressive. But here's the question I kept coming back to while making this video. Once you've unlocked all those vehicles, what do you actually do with them? Let's say you spend 300 hours researching your dream tank. You finally unlock it, you buy the crew, you install the modifications, and you load into your first match. And then what? For almost every player, the answer is the same. You queue for another ground realistic battle. The vehicle changes, the experience barely does. And I think that's where War Thunder's biggest long-term problem begins. Every update makes the game bigger, but very few updates actually change how we play it. More vehicles, more premiums, that's just more things to research. But almost always the exact same gameplay loop. Spawn, try to capture a point, fight, return to the hangar. Spawn, try to capture a point, fight, return to the hangar. Spawn, try to capture a point, fight, return to the hangar. There's nothing inherently wrong with that gameplay loop. After all, it's the reason many of us fell in love with War Thunder in the first place. The problem is that after thousands of battles, it hasn't meaningfully evolved at all. And before anyone says, well, that's just what War Thunder is, I think it's worth asking another question. Is that the way it has to be? Because every year Gaijin proves something. The developers are incredibly creative. We've seen giant mechs, modern warfare vehicles, space battles, submarines, and even UFO battles. Each one of those are entirely new mechanics that completely change how War Thunder feels to play. And every single time, the community loves experimenting with them. But then, the same thing always happens. The event ends, the servers close, and those ideas disappear. Some of the most creative gameplay War Thunder has ever produced becomes a memory instead of becoming part of the game permanently. And that's the part I struggle to understand, because these events prove the developers have the talent to build entirely new experience for players. They've already done it. The question is, why aren't more of these experiences allowed to live beyond a 2-week event period? And that's what made me realize something. War Thunder doesn't have a shortage of content. It has a shortage of permanent experiences. Those aren't the same thing at all. Adding another premium tank gives players another vehicle to grind and unlock. Adding another permanent game mode gives players another reason to log in and play the game. Those are two very different kinds of updates. And I think that's a distinction Gaijin needs to start thinking about. So if War Thunder has already shown it can create incredible new experiences, why haven't those experiences become a permanent part of the game? To answer that, I think we need to look at how other games approach this problem. World of Warships. No, the games aren't identical. And I'm not saying that War Thunder should copy every single thing that they do, but I do think there's something worth learning from in regards to how they operate in their game. When World of Warships introduces new ways to play, many of those ideas don't disappear forever. Players can choose from random battles, co-op battles, operations, asymmetric battles, ranked, clan battles, many other things like that. Not every player enjoys every mode, but that's the exact point. Players have multiple options on what they can play. Now imagine if War Thunder approached its events and game modes the exact same way. Imagine opening the game and seeing a permanent special modes tab. Inside of it, you have every April Fool's event or even slide event that's ever happened. A different featured event returns. Not just for fun even, but maybe you can earn some research points, some silver lions or battle pass progress, real progression, even if it's at a slower pace. Suddenly players wouldn't just have another vehicle to grind, they'd have another reason to log in. And I want to go ahead and get to before someone says anything about it. Well, splitting the player base would hurt the matchmaking. While that is a totally fair concern, War Thunder has already shown it can support temporary events alongside its core modes. The infrastructure already exists, technology already exists, the player interest clearly exists. The question isn't whether Gaijin can build these experiences. They already have. The question is whether they're willing to let those experiences become part of the game's future instead of the part of the game's history. And I think that's the difference between adding content and building a live service game that continues to evolve. One gives players another grind, the other gives them another story, another memory, another reason to invite a friend back, because eventually every player unlocks their dream vehicle. The real challenge begins after that. What keeps them playing next week, next month, or even next year? And that's why I don't think War Thunder's biggest challenge is running out of vehicles to add. I think it's running out of new experiences to offer to players. Because if every update is measured by how many vehicles it introduces instead of how many memories it creates, eventually the updates start feeling predictable, and that's when even a successful game can begin standing still. So if gameplay variety isn't keeping pace with the size of the game, what happens when players finally reach the end of the grind? That's where the conversation changes, because now we're not just talking about content anymore, we're talking about motivation. At this point, you might be thinking, isn't War Thunder supposed to be a grind? The reason we fell in love with the game? And honestly, yes. Progression has always and forever will be a part of this game's identity. Unlocking your first Tiger, finally reaching your first jet, getting that modern MBT you've been working toward for months. These moments are incredibly satisfying. Without that sense of progression, War Thunder probably wouldn't be nearly as addictive as it is today. But here's the question I don't think gets asked enough. What happens after that? What happens when you've already unlocked all the vehicles you've wanted? Because eventually, every player reaches that point. Maybe not every nation, maybe not every vehicle, but eventually you log in one day, open your tech tree, and realize there's nothing left that you're excited to chase for. And that's when I think something very interesting happens. You stop playing because of the reward, and you start playing because of the gameplay, which sounds really obvious. But that's actually where live service games are put to the test. Because once progression is no longer the motivation, the experience itself has to carry the game. I've seen so many veteran players say the same thing. It isn't that they've run out of vehicles, it's that they've run out of surprises. They know the maps. They know the strategies, they know the spawn points, they know exactly how most matches are going to play out before the countdown even reaches 0. That's not because War Thunder is a bad game, it's because they've spent thousands of hours mastering it, and mastery creates a new challenge. How do you keep experienced players engaged? And this is where I think permanent alternative game modes could make a huge difference for the community. Not because everyone would play them, because we know they wouldn't. Just like not everyone plays simulator battles, or naval, or even custom battles. And that's completely fine. The goal isn't replacing any of the current modes. The goal is giving veteran players another option, or even newcoming players, to give them another challenge. Another reason to keep logging in after they've achieved everything they originally set out to accomplish in the first place. And I think that's the biggest difference between adding content and extending a game's lifespan. One gives players another destination, the other gives them another journey. Because no matter how many vehicles Gaijin adds over the next 10 years, every one of them eventually becomes familiar. The only thing that truly stays fresh is finding new ways to experience them. And I think that's where another issue starts becoming impossible to ignore. Because even when the community agrees something needs attention, many players don't believe meaningful change is coming at all. And whether that's fair or not, perception matters. Because perception shapes trust. And trust shapes the future of every live service game. So let's talk about trust. Because I don't think War Thunder has a player count problem. I think it has a confidence problem. Every live service game eventually reaches a point where content alone just isn't enough. Eventually, players stop asking, what's the next vehicle? And they start asking, where's this game actually even going? That's where trust becomes one of the most valuable things a developer can have in their arsenal. Because trust determines how players react to every new update. If players trust the developers, well, they're usually willing to give new ideas a chance. But when that trust starts to fade, every update is viewed through a different lens. We've already seen what happens when that relationship begins to break down. In 2023, War Thunder experienced one of the biggest community backlashes in its entire history. Players were frustrated with the economy, Steam reviews dropped dramatically, and for a moment, it genuinely felt like the relationship between Gaijin and its community had reached a breaking point. But here's something I think that often gets forgotten. Gaijin responded. They published a roadmap. They adjusted parts of the economy. They opened more communication with the community. Those changes do matter. Whether you believe that they went far enough or not, it's only fair to acknowledge that they did happen. So why am I still talking about trust? Because trust isn't rebuilt by solving a single problem. It's rebuilt by consistently showing players that their feedback shapes the future of the game. And I think that's where War Thunder still has work to do. Not because the developers don't care, not because they aren't talented, but because some of the community's biggest conversations have stayed remarkably similar for years. Battle ratings, gameplay variety, long-term progression, the details change, but the conversations often don't. And that's important because perception has a strange way of becoming reality. If enough players believe meaningful innovation takes too long, some of them just stop expecting it. Then they stop asking for it. And eventually, some simply just stop logging in. Not because they hate the game, but because they feel like they've already experienced everything the game has to offer. And honestly, I don't 100% think that's where War Thunder is today. But I do think it's a direction the game should be careful not to move towards, as it seems like they might be. Because player numbers can stay healthy for a long time, revenue can stay strong, new vehicles can keep arriving, while underneath the surface, player excitement slowly begins to fade, and that's way harder to measure. But it's also much harder to recover once it's gone. And I think that's what this entire video really has been about. Not whether War Thunder is successful today, because it clearly is. The real question is whether success today is enough to guarantee success 10 years from now. Because history has shown us, the games that survive the longest aren't always the ones with the most content. They're the ones that keep finding new ways to surprise and entertain their players. So, if that's the challenge War Thunder faces, what does the future actually look like? So, after everything we've talked about, is War Thunder actually headed for disaster? Honestly, not yet. And that's probably the most important point in this entire video. Because if you've made it this far, you already know this wasn't a video about player count. It wasn't even a video about whether the game is dead or not. And it definitely wasn't a video saying Gaijin hasn't done anything right. In fact, I think the opposite is true. War Thunder has accomplished something very few games ever manage. It survived for more than a decade. It has one of the largest collections of playable military vehicles ever created. It continues attracting new players, and despite every single controversy, people keep coming back. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because underneath everything we've talked about today, War Thunder is still an incredible game. But being successful today doesn't automatically guarantee success for tomorrow, because live service games don't stand still. Player expectations change, technology changes, competition changes, and the games that survive are usually the ones willing to evolve before they're forced to. That's why I think War Thunder is standing at a very important crossroads. Gaijin has already proven they can build incredible vehicles. They've proven they can create fun, experimental game modes, and they've proven they can respond when the community pushes back. Now, I think the next challenge is bringing all those together, not just adding another tank, not just adding another premium, but asking a different question entirely. How do we make War Thunder even more fun for the people who've already spent thousands of hours playing it? And maybe the answer isn't one giant update. Maybe it's something much simpler. A permanent rotation of classic April Fool's events, experimental game modes that reward progression, community voted playlists, weekend challenges that actually change how the game is played, small additions, easy additions that make the game feel fresh again. Because innovation doesn't always have to be revolutionary. Sometimes it just has to give players a reason to smile and come back. And if Gaijin ever decided to take that approach, I honestly think War Thunder could continue thriving for another decade, even longer maybe. Not because it has the most vehicles, but because it would have the most reasons to keep coming back. That's the difference. One keeps players grinding, and the other keeps players engaged. So, while I don't think War Thunder is headed for disaster, I don't really think that's decided yet either. I do think Gaijin is approaching a moment where the choices they make today will shape what the game looks like 10 years from now. Because every great live service game eventually faces the same question. Do we keep making more of the same, or do we find new ways to make players fall in love with the game all over again? I've spent thousands of hours playing War Thunder, and if you're still watching this video, there's a good chance you have too. That's why I made this. Not because I want to see the game fail, but because I genuinely believe it's capable of being even better than it already is. The developers have the talent, the community has the passion, the foundation is already there. Now, it's just a question of where the game goes next. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think War Thunder needs more permanent game modes? Do you think the current formula is enough? Or do you think the game is already heading in the right direction? Whatever your opinion, I'd love to read it in the comments. I hope to see you guys down there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Be blessed. Peace.